Why hello, Blair here of Chaos Costumes, and I'm here to teach you how to make a cool thing. I've always wanted to make this project. I think you'll love to see it come to life. So without further ado, let's get started. So last week we made this really awesome mug, and some would call it a tankard. But today we're going to apply all of the knowledge that we have accumulated from our previous projects into a fun new project. Unfortunately, we don't need the sphere, but let's save it as what it's going to be. A mimic. Let's first add a box and resize it to what we want. So we'll make this 90 millimeters. You can click on the home button in the top corner to zoom out quickly, and it's going to be 1.5 units wide. We will hide that box for now and insert a cylinder. Same thing, making it 90 millimeters and 1.5 units tall. We're going to apply the same logic that we did with the mug to create a wood texture. So we'll add a box and add a radial repeater on it. We want the edges to be flush along the side of the box, so choose your division that way. Make sure you have the radial layer selected to edit it. I wound up going with 16. Before we validate that box, let's increase the division so it can sculpt right on top of it. Just like the mug, we're going to hammer in some wood texture, so we turn off the symmetry and sculpt with the clay tool and the crease tool. Now that I'm happy with that, we're going to clone the box. We'll take it out of the radial repeater and we'll use that later. To glue everything together, what I'm going to do is decimate this box so that its vertices when it's glued together are manageable. We just join those two layers, so now it's all one thing. And take the box and the cylinder and rotate them. Now we can organize our layers. The name of this part is the lid. Now we have this rogue wood plank that we can use to flesh out the rest of the texture. If you try to add a curve repeater to this, it's going to build it off to the side, and I'll teach you how to fix that. With the snapping on, you're going to click on the pivot and pivot the green arrow down. And then now when you add a curve, it builds it downwards. Now we're going to show the original box and move it down to where we want it. This will give us a template of where our planks will go. Now you can select the curve and shrink it down to match the edges of the box. You can increase the count from here. Just like with the lid, let's decimate the one box before we glue it together. And just select the curve and the box and then click join. So what we're going to do here is make a clone of that one box, and that's a wall that we'll use later to flesh out the other side. Then make sure to select the Z axis for the back side and untoggle the X axis, and we're going to flesh out the symmetry that way. You'll hit yes and the right side arrow. Now that we have the front and the back done, let's make the sides. So I rotated that with the snapping on to get it at a 90-degree angle and sliding it around to find where I want it to be. I want to know where to trim it, so I'm going to move it in the box and then trim the sides off. We're going to clone that and move it up to finish out the sides, and then I'll trim that around the top of the circle. But I'm having a hard time seeing where the lid is. Now that I can see where the end of that box is, let's shrink that around and trim it. I'm going to go in with the polygon tool and perfectly trace out this semicircle. And what I'm going to toggle is the flip selection so that it only trims out what is around our selection. Now that we have a nice little curved side, let's bring that out. So we're going to take this time to hollow out this box. So I have the original cylinder primitive. I'm going to clone that. I have the original cylinder primitive and I have the original box. So I'm going to Boolean out the original box from the cylinder. For some reason, it left this little sliver, so I'm just going to trim that out. And now that I'm thinking about it, I can just force symmetry for the right stuff. So I'm going to click on that little arrow, force symmetry, and then I got rid of that little sliver. Now I'm going to go in with the gizmo tool, just like the other chest, clone it with the X-ray turned on so I can see what's going on, and make it smaller by 0.9. Now I can Boolean out that shape. I want to get rid of the complete radial repeater around the edges just so it's the semicircle. So let's trim that off. Now we can combine everything by selecting everything in an organized fashion and joining it. Whatever's on the bottom, it will assume that name. Now let's hollow out this box. Same gist with the clone, on the X-ray so you can see what you're doing, and making it 0.9. I like to make it a little taller just to cut out the bottom nicely. He's necky on one side, what the heck? Let's fix that. So I'm saying that the boards are a little bit too tall, so I'm just shrinking those guys. Now let's make him less necky on one side and force the symmetry along the x-axis. Now he's completely covered in wood. Wood. Now that I'm happy with everything, I can select it all and glue it together with the join tool. And he gets a name! His name is Bottom. We have a box made out of wood. Now I want to add a little border around him. So let's add a box, just to make those corners look a lot nicer. So we'll make him 90 centimeters to start off with, but I think I want to make him about 1.7 units wide. We'll make him 1.7 units long and 1.2 units wide. Let's validate him and trim off pretty much everything except for the corner. Now that I'm looking at him, he's sticking out quite a bit, so let's tuck that in a bit. I want to make sure it's not peeking in the middle, so I will shorten it a bit. Now let's hammer in some symmetry, so it's on both sides. Then make it symmetrical along the back side using the Z-axis. Now I'm going to add it to the bottom layer. So we're going to make a border around the top edge, so we add a cylinder using the same method. Now that I'm happy with it, let's validate it and trim it. To make this a neat little border, what we're going to do is make a copy of it. If your gizmo isn't right there in the shape, you can use the pivot and center what you've selected. Now we can use the clone tool and make a shape that we can boolean out, and then force some symmetry along the x-axis. Now we can join everything just to keep things neat, and what we'll wind up doing is decimating it so it can calculate quicker. Make sure to keep sharp edges when you voxel remesh these things together. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want to sculpt all of it together. So now we're going to go in with the move tool and open his mouth a bit. I want to make sure symmetry is toggled. Now that we got the mouth open, let's add some gums and a soft palate. The thing that goes under your tongue? I don't know what that is. So here I'm using a torus for the gums. If you select the tube option, it gives you these little pink dots that you can use to shrink the donut and make it half eaten, half it? Half the torus. Make the torus whatever pie slice you want. Now that I'm happy with it, let's trim the bottom off. I want to drag out these edges, so what we're going to do is use a mask in the select mask option, and then invert the mask and then drag it out. Don't forget to remove the mask once you're done. Now I can push and pull it around to fill in those voids. You ideally don't want any voids when 3D printing. The best way to check for voids is using the X-ray tool. Now we're going to add underneath the tongue and insert a sphere. It doesn't have to be placed symmetrically because we can force symmetry later. Now that I'm happy with those pieces, let's voxel remesh them together. I want to make this bottom palette into the top palette, so we're going to clone it and rotate it around so we have less work to do. So now this will be the top gummy works. Let's shove that in the lid. He's ready to gum you to death. Nom, 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 nom. So I'll use the X-ray and the trim tool to trim around those edges here. Same technique as before, just drawing out exactly where you want your edges and then using the flip tool to trim everything out. Make sure you don't forget the bottom. Let's open his mouth a bit by changing the pivot to about where the hinge is with the lid selected. Make sure to turn off snapping and open his mouth. Now we have room to work in there. So let's add fun and funky details under here with the brush tool. I'm totally not feeling the inside of my mouth with my tongue to try and figure out how a top of a mouth works. Now we get to add the fun part, which is teeth, gnashers, chippy chompies. So I'm going in with the tube tool to kind of flesh in a tooth shape, and then I'll taper it with the radius. Now I want these teeth to be more dynamic, so I'm going to go in with the profile tool here in the tube menu and kind of drag things around to where I want them. You could use the twist feature to twist around your geometry to get it to sit where you want it to sit. Now we're going to add the mirror in there. Now mix teeth on both sides. So with that tube selected, if I draw more tubes, it will copy that geometry. Sometimes to avoid the nodes, I'll go every other side. Now you can drag them around and do whatever you want with them. If you click on the very middle of the gizmo, you can kind of freeform move stuff around. So I'm realizing here that the teeth are glitching. So even though I have the mirror on, it's off center. I don't know what the problem is. It happens every now and again. If you restart Nomad, it fixes it. But I'm going to teach you how to fix it accordingly. So I'm going to select all these tubes and glue them together. And then I'm going to move them to origin and it should center them. Now they're symmetrical. Now I don't have to fight with them like I did before, pushing and pulling them back and forth. Since I only joined them, if I use the move tool on each individual tooth, it won't affect the rest of them. The symmetry still is acting a little funky. Like, why are those two teeth moving? I do not understand, but I can force a mirror in there and fix it. There, now the teeth are symmetrical and should sculpt symmetrically. I mean, there's this weird middle tooth right there, but I'll just get rid of that and turn off the flip. There, now the symmetry is working. Like I said, I don't know what the problem is. I think it's actually a glitch, and this is the way to work around it. Now that I'm happy with the teeth, we can clone them and put them in the bottom. Once again, we use the gizmo and the snapping. Now we can use the move tool to move the teeth around and make sure they're not colliding. Eventually, this box will open and close, so we don't want any of the teeth colliding with each other. And do a chomp. Those teeth are kind of floating in the middle of nowhere. Let's fix that. So I'll just take the lid and the bottom teeth and rotate them down. Once again, changing the pivot point to about where the hinge is going to be. Now we get to move the teeth around and get them to line up with the bottom gums. Now let's add fun details underneath the mouth. So what I want to do is build out enough for a tongue to key in, because we will have to print it separately. I'm just adding some striations here. Then little sockets where the teeth go. Then very light smoothing around the edges here. I turned down my intensity pretty low. I want to make sure that the front looks nice and early too. I don't like how straight across that looks, so I tucked in the middle a little bit. Right now, I am smoothing the tips of the teeth to make them look a little bit pointier and a little less geometric. You don't want to drag your tubes to a perfect point, A, because they'll print crappy, and B, it'll be a little too sharp of an angle. Now that I have the teeth where I want them on the top jaw too, we will add gum details. Now we'll pointify these teeth too by going over them with the smooth tool. Now let's give this guy some lips, and we're going to do it with the tube tool. If you're having trouble drawing random tubes, make sure you have the view toggled in this menu. So I toggled on the mirror, and the mirror still is doing weird stuff. Let's make the profile lip-shaped, whatever that is, and then we'll twist it around. And I'm realizing the concave part is on the wrong side, so we'll save that as a preset, and I'm going to force a symmetry modifier in there by clicking the X-axis and then just untoggling that to fix one side. Now let's twist this around to where we want it. I want to give him a cute little cupid's bow, so I'll just sharpen that curve on the top by clicking the node and it turns black and moving it around. So I'm seeing here the mirror is just not working, so I'm going to add a mirror modifier instead. For some reason this fixes it. Now I can tuck those two tubes together and eventually it'll be one shape. I want to flatten these lips a little bit. We want to make sure there's no voids anywhere that we can see. Now let's add some lips on the bottom. So we'll select the original lip and then draw a tube so it will copy that shape. Then we can twist it around to where we want it. So now that I'm happy with this tube, I'm going to validate it and force some symmetry so it kind of glues the shapes together. So when I go to smooth it, it's all in one shape. But I'm realizing it's still under the mirror modifier, so I'm going to take that out. Now we got that tube down there, and same just do a mirror modifying. Now I can smooth out that transition. We just want to push and pull things around until we get it where we want it. Since this tube was at a harsh angle, you'll need to voxel remesh it to glue those two edges together and smooth them out. I want to rebuild this crease, so I'm going in with the brush tool to build that bump out, and then go in with the smooth tool to blend those shapes together. Now let's go in with the crease tool to make his little butthole mouth. Just kidding, adding texture to the lips. Now that he's sufficiently nasty with his little butthole lips, let's give him a tongue. So we'll use the tube tool for this, and we will use the profile tool and make a tongue shape. And same thing, we can twist it around. I want to make sure it's not colliding with any of the teeth or the front of the box. And to make the tongue curved, I'm going to select the radius option twice to get control over all the nodes and curve it around like that. And get control over all of the nodes and shrink just the tip. Just the tip. Now I want to move the tongue to the base of the palate, the bottom palate, the underneath side of the tongue. There has to be a name for it so that I can use that as a key for it to insert. Now I'm making sure it's not touching the T-fers. Now to fix that crease, I'm going to remesh it and smooth that corner out. And also smooth out the tip. Now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to take just the inner palette and subtract it from the tongue. Make sure to make a copy of this before you do it. Now the tongue has a nice little key in here. So let's see if the back of the tongue is colliding with the box, and it is, so let's trim that. Now it's time to add hinges, the right way this time. Push those teeth around so they don't collide. And the tongue will be separate, so we don't have to worry about the collision. So to add hinges the right way the first time, we're going to add a cylinder and rotate it on snapping. And push the cylinder in there just so it doesn't collide on the inside of the box and there's some lip to the inside of the box. We're making a shape to cut out, so we want to make sure there's some clearance and material that builds around the cylinder. Since we're going to subtract the shapes from both sides, let's add a mirror modifier to this cylinder and glue it together. Make sure to make copies of the cylinder before you do this, because we will be using that secondary cylinder to make the rest of the hinge. Now that you have that shape, we're going to use that shape to boolean out a void. Make sure to copy it because we'll need it twice. One cylinder is for the lid, one cylinder is for the bottom. So we'll take those two shapes, disappear one, and boolean it out. And same thing for the bottom. You want to make sure both sides are being booleaned because we sculpted this asymmetrically with the wood texture. Now we're going to take that original cylinder and build out the hinge. So this insert part, we're going to make it 0.7, and we will boolean that out so that we have one hollow cylinder. So the same gist with the big cylinder, what we're doing is booleaning out the small cylinder and making sure to mirror that. We glue those two things together to make sure that we're cutting out everything that we want. If you do not glue the mirror to your shape, it's not real, if that makes sense. It's like a visual aspect, but not a tangible aspect. And we're doing the same thing to the bottom as well. Now the clearance shapes have been cut out. Now what we can do is make the hollow portion of the hinge. We will subtract the small peg out of the big peg. So that open peg will go on the lid, and the small peg will go on the bottom. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so there's better clearance. So there's just a little gap in between there. I don't like that the edge isn't lined up, so I'm going to drag it wider a little bit. Now we're going to turn on the X-ray and give the hinge just a little bit of clearance overlap so that it snaps in nicely. I turn off the auto validate so I can move things around a little bit. Now that I trimmed out that middle part, I'm going to smooth out these corners. That could happen a lot more effectively if I remesh it and turn off keep sharp edges. Now that I'm happy with the hinges, I can make them symmetrical by forcing a mirror, and same with the one on the lid. Alright, so now that I'm looking a little closer, it looks like I booleaned out a little gap in this hinge, so let's fix that. I'm going to add a box and fill in that void. I just want to make sure it's not overlapping the inside of the hinge. So I'm going to drag that box up and fill in that void completely. Now I'm going to add a mirror modifier and then clone that box over. Now that we're happy with them, let's glue the mirror and the two boxes together, and we'll trim this in a nice little triangle. While we're here, let's reinforce the top hinge. I'm going to use the same technique, adding a nice little box and trimming it into a triangle. Here we'll have a nice little box, we will mirror it, we'll trim it into a nice little triangle. And I'll add a nice little mirror modifier so it's on both sides. Now these hinges are reinforced. I'll smooth them down a little bit just to make them prettier. Now these hinges will definitely not snap off. Now that I'm happy with all of that, let's see what that mouth do. So we'll change the pivot right where the hinge is and see if he opens and closes nicely. Turn off the snapping. So yeah, he opens and closes really nicely. Let's name the tongue tongue, and we'll select the bottom and the lid to join them and find out how many vertices there are. Right now it's pretty high, so let's decimate it. How low can you go? How low can you go? It's 152 vertices. Just kidding. It's 152k vertices. Now that's a lot more manageable, so let's export it. So I like to export STL and selected. If I do it selected, it exports the name that I've given it in the layers. You can save everything as visible and export it that way and then split it in your slicer, but I used to do things back in the day. 4 years ago. It used to be a little different, so I just kind of keep doing it this way. Let's send them to print. Let's start a new project and slice this bad boy. So we want to make sure that your settings are to random seam position. The strength has lightning infill and 3 walls, and the support's enabled with tree supports. Last thing you want is an inner and outer brim. Let's import the Mimic, and you want to select No. Now that we have all of these pieces, let's add another build plate because we want to print the tongue a different color. Looks like the tongue needs to be repaired, so let's do that. It looks like to me that it's printing kind of big, so let's select everything by holding down the Control key and clicking them, and scaling them to about 70%. Now that's a lot more manageable, and won't take forever to print. So at the top of this chest, we want to print it upside down and at an angle. So let's rotate it. You want it to be about 45 degrees or more. Now that we have where the support's going to be built visible, we're going to keep the support from being built in the wood grain. That's going to be a nightmare to remove. So you right click and it subtracts where the support is built. So I'm using the sphere to carve in the negative and positive. I want to build out the support around this corner just so it's successful. Then I'm building little pockets of support here and here so that it stays stable. Now it looks like to me the chest is ready to print. Now let's look at this tongue. I want to rotate it a little bit just so it's built closer to the build plate and rotate it this direction. Along this little corner here, I'm going to make sure to paint in some supports because this corner is likely to fail. Now that we have both objects placed correctly, let's slice them. And now we print. Since we're going to be printing the tongue in a different color, let's click this plate and slice that tongue. What'd that tongue do? Let's print that nasty boy. I really love how all of this turned out. I mean, who doesn't like excessive amounts of teeth and a nasty little tongue and a butthole mouth? I hope you guys have been enjoying my tutorials and my creations, but I really want to know what you guys would like to see. So if you could comment below your suggestions, I will gladly accept them. Also, I keep forgetting to say like, comment, and subscribe. Whatever you want to do, really. If you want to subscribe, subscribe. If you want to comment, comment. If you want to like the video. I mean, that one's pretty easy, just do it. That helps me a lot. I really look forward to seeing where everything goes. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.